A grainy photograph, dated July 1944, shows a group of American pilots clustered around a table in a dimly lit briefing room. Their faces are tense, eyes glazed, fingers trembling slightly as they clutch small, unmarked tablets. The caption reads simply, "Operation Vengeance, Pre-Mission Briefing." But an intercepted radio transmission, fragmented and distorted, crackles over the speaker. Effects unusual, targets unreachable, pilot unstable. The paradox is stark. These men, steeled by rigorous training, were simultaneously enhanced and undermined by invisible forces. How could the very drugs meant to sharpen reflexes instead fray nerves? Why did Japanese intelligence, long focused on intercepting planes and codes, overlook the chemical edge the Americans wielded? What secret prescriptions were delivered alongside flight orders, and what shadows lurked behind those pills? In early 1943, whispers began filtering through Japanese military channels about a new American strategy: psychotropic stimulants distributed to fighter pilots. According to a confidential report from a Tokyo-based intelligence officer, the U.S. Navy had initiated a program to improve pilot endurance and reduce fear during prolonged air combat. The source described a blue pill administered before sorties, believed to enhance focus and suppress fatigue. This came at a time when Japan's own medical corps struggled to maintain pilot stamina amid relentless Allied bombing campaigns. A faded schematic found in a captured U.S. cargo manifest detailed containers labeled with chemical formulas, components unknown to Japanese pharmacology at the time. How did such a potent pharmaceutical arsenal escape early detection? Was Japan's intelligence apparatus blinded by conventional warfare tactics, missing the silent chemical war beneath? The substance in question was methamphetamine, known to the Americans as Obatrol. Distributed in doses calibrated to balance heightened alertness without overt psychosis. These pills gave pilots the ability to fly extended missions, sometimes exceeding 12 hours. Medical logs recovered from a forward airbase in Okinawa reveal repeated entries of pilot exhibiting hyperactivity, decreased need for sleep, increased aggression. The drug's dark side was evident: paranoia and erratic behavior, side effects carefully managed through medical supervision. Yet, the Japanese pilots faced a stark contrast, many relying on traditional stimulants like caffeine or even amphetamines with less precision. The chemical advantage was invisible, its edges blurred in the fog of war. What vulnerabilities did this reliance expose? And how sustainable was such a chemically fueled combat effectiveness in the long term? The first confirmed encounter with these drug-enhanced pilots occurred in late 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Japanese reconnaissance noted American squadrons flying with relentless precision, their sorties unbroken by fatigue. Squadron commanders reported an uncanny resilience. Pilots returning from sorties with no signs of exhaustion, engaging in multiple dogfights in a single day. A declassified mission log from a Japanese cruiser describes the psychological impact. Enemy pilots seemed impervious to fear, their movements mechanical, yet deadly accurate. However, some Japanese intelligence officers suspected something beyond mere training. An intercepted encoded message hinted at chemical support, but was dismissed as misinformation initially. How was this chemical warfare overlooked for so long? Did the headquarters fail to connect the dots between pilot behavior and pharmacological enhancement? Japan's response evolved as the drug-fueled endurance of American pilots became undeniable. Field commanders ordered intensified physical conditioning and introduced countermeasures such as night flying drills and psychological resilience training. Engineers at Mitsubishi accelerated development of new aerial tactics, designed to exploit moments when American pilots showed signs of drug withdrawal or overexertion. Manuals were updated with warnings about the unnatural stamina observed in enemy pilots, urging vigilance against prolonged engagements. Yet, these measures were reactive, piecemeal, struggling against an enemy whose advantage was not solely mechanical, but chemical. Did this shift in tactics truly level the playing field, or was it a desperate attempt to patch a widening gap? What clandestine research, if any, did Japan undertake to match or counteract these psychotropic agents? By early 1945, the toll of chemical enhancement was becoming evident even to the Americans. Medical reports from naval hospitals detailed cases of dependency and severe psychological breakdowns among pilots. Meanwhile, Japanese forces exploited these weaknesses, targeting airfields during pilot rest periods and intercepting missions when drug effects waned. A strategic map recovered from a Japanese general's archives shows coordinated strikes timed with intelligence on pilot rotation schedules, aiming to capitalize on moments of vulnerability. The chemical edge that once seemed an unassailable advantage was fraying under relentless pressure. A secret protocol from a Japanese intelligence committee suggested plans to develop their own stimulant programs, though none reached full deployment before the war's end. How close did Japan come to a pharmacological arms race? And what does this reveal about the hidden battles waged beyond the visible front lines? The revelation of psychotropic drugs in American pilot forces shocked Japan not merely because of their immediate tactical impact, but because it exposed a new frontier of warfare, one where victory was engineered in the chemistry of the mind. Behind every flight plan and battle report lay a shadow war fought in the bloodstream of combatants, a war Japan had neither anticipated nor fully understood until too late. The echoes of this chemical conflict would haunt post-war military doctrine on both sides, raising unsettling questions about the human cost of enhanced combat and the blurred boundaries between soldier and experiment. How did this silent war shape the fate of pilots caught in its grip? And what secrets remain buried in the classified archives, waiting for the next document to surface? Each episode is a document I pull from the dust of the archives. Share your own stories. Many of you have relatives who lived through that time, and your words help connect personal memory with archival evidence. Stay curious. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode tomorrow. The aftermath of the war left Japan grappling not only with physical devastation, but with the intangible scars of an invisible chemical conflict. In dusty storage rooms of former military hospitals, forgotten medical journals were uncovered, pages stained with age, detailing symptoms never publicly acknowledged. One entry from a Kyoto field, medic speaks of unusual neurochemical disturbances in captured American pilots, describing tremors, hallucinations, and disorientation inconsistent with battle fatigue. Photographs taken during prisoner interrogations show eyes darting nervously, hands twitching involuntarily. These images, initially dismissed as the trauma of captivity, now suggest a deeper, drug-induced psychosis. How many of these pilots were unwitting victims of the very substances meant to empower them? And why did post-war analyses avoid confronting this darker legacy? In the early 1950s, as Japan rebuilt its self-defense forces, intelligence documents reveal a quiet but intense interest in psychotropic substances as tools of warfare. Translated reports from U.S. military pharmacologists circulated among top Japanese strategists, describing ongoing research into amphetamines and other cognitive enhancers. A faded blueprint of a proposed pilot endurance program surfaced in a classified file, outlining protocols eerily similar to those employed by the Americans years before. Yet Japan's efforts remain tentative, constrained by ethical debates and limited resources. A map of pilot training bases from this period shows an experimental wing dedicated to physiological studies, but records remain scarce. What prevented Japan from fully embracing this new battlefield science? Was it a conscious moral line or a strategic miscalculation? Meanwhile, former American pilots' memoirs began to surface, offering fragmented testimonies about the psychological toll of their chemical regimen. In one interview, a retired U.S. Navy pilot recalls the paradox. The pills made you feel invincible, but underneath, you were unraveling. You couldn't sleep, couldn't trust your own mind. These personal accounts, recorded decades later, shed light on a hidden cost rarely acknowledged in official histories. Archival audio recordings from veterans' reunions capture moments of uneasy laughter and silent pauses when the topic arose. How did these men reconcile their enhanced bravery with the creeping sense of dependency and loss of control? And what responsibility did military command bear for unleashing this chemical gamble? The Japanese medical community, long sidelined by the focus on conventional warfare, began investigating the neurochemical effects of stimulant drugs in the late 1950s. A report authored by a leading neurologist at the University of Tokyo detailed the long-term consequences. observed in veterans exposed to amphetamine-like substances during the Pacific War. The study, illustrated with brain scans and behavioral charts, suggested links to chronic anxiety, psychosis, and cognitive decline. Yet, the government's stance remained cautious, withholding full disclosure amid Cold War tensions and emerging alliances. A sealed envelope marked "Top Secret" in the National Archives hints at suppressed findings and political pressures. Why was this research kept from public scrutiny? What fears dictated silence over scientific truth? At the edge of this unfolding narrative lies the uneasy intersection of technology, biology, and ethics. Newly declassified documents from American military archives reveal experimental protocols extending beyond World War II, testing a range of psychotropic compounds on servicemen under classified conditions. Photographs of laboratory setups show rows of test subjects monitored by stern-faced doctors, wires attached to heads, eyes fixed on flickering screens. Correspondence between military officials debates the fine line between enhancement and exploitation. Japan's initial shock at the revelation of stimulant use among enemy pilots now appears as the opening chapter of a much larger story, a global contest to control the human mind in war. What price was paid for this control, and who decided where the line should be drawn? Amidst the shadows of these revelations, a final question lingers over the silent corridors of history. How much of modern warfare's relentless drive for advantage is rooted in that chemical gamble, this uneasy marriage of science and survival? The story of Japan's shock at American psychotropic use is not merely an isolated wartime anomaly, but a prelude to a new era where victory may depend as much on synthetic courage as on steel and fire. In the quiet aftermath, the ghosts of those pilots, both Japanese and American, remain caught in a struggle beyond the battlefield, a conflict written in the language of neurochemistry and secrecy. What truths remain hidden, waiting in the classified shadows, to be uncovered by those willing to look beyond the surface? In the years following the war, whispered conversations among Japan's surviving military strategists reveal a lingering sense of betrayal, not only by the enemy's chemical arsenal, but by their own unpreparedness. A confidential memorandum from 1946, unearthed in a private collection, details debates within the Imperial General headquarters about the unseen weapon that had eroded pilot effectiveness. The document, stained with water and time, references a pharmacological surprise that rendered traditional combat training insufficient. A faded map pinned to the memorandum marks key airfields where encounters with drug-enhanced American pilots were most intense. Yet the document abruptly ends with a question scrawled in the margin. How could we have been so blind to this silent war? Was this oversight a failure of intelligence or a deeper underestimation of science's role in modern conflict? Meanwhile, in Tokyo's archives, a set of hand-drawn charts by a medical officer at a naval hospital depicts the physiological effects of methamphetamine on captured American airmen. The illustrations are clinical but haunting, heart rates spiking, pupils dilated, brain scans showing abnormal activity patterns. Interspersed are handwritten notes warning of psychological fragility beneath chemical fortitude. This duality, power paired with vulnerability, was something Japanese commanders struggled to exploit. Field reports from late 1944 describe attempts to bait American pilots into extended dogfights, hoping to provoke drug-induced breakdowns, but with mixed success. How much did the enemy understand their own pilots' limits, and what intelligence was truly shared within the Allied command about these drugs' risks and benefits? A startling revelation emerges from a fragment of a radio intercept, recorded on a cracked reel found in a remote Hokkaido bunker in 1952. The garbled transmission, partially decoded, includes references to synthetic stimulants, pilot endurance protocols, and side effect management. It appears to be an internal American communication discussing dosage adjustments and monitoring procedures. The intercept's poor quality suggests it was deliberately obscured or jammed. This raises unsettling questions. How far did American command go to conceal its pharmaceutical tactics? And was Japan's failure to fully grasp the scope of these measures a result of deliberate misinformation or systemic intelligence gaps? Further complicating the picture, accounts from Japanese pilots captured during the war mention encounters with disoriented or overly aggressive American pilots, behaviors inconsistent with expected combat stress. One diary entry by a flight lieutenant describes an enemy pilot moving like a machine, eyes wild but unseeing, firing relentlessly without regard for self. Such testimonies, pieced together from various sources, hint at the psychological toll of the stimulants, an edge that could just as easily become a liability. In the aftermath, the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force reportedly studied these accounts to develop psychological resilience training. Could this be seen as an early recognition of the interplay between pharmacology and mental health in warfare? And how did these lessons influence Japan's post-war military doctrine? The physical remnants of this chemical conflict also linger in unexpected places. In 1960, workers renovating an abandoned airbase outside Nagasaki uncovered a locked metal box containing vials labeled in English with chemical symbols and dosage instructions. The vials, preserved in a small wooden crate, suggested an on-site stockpile of stimulant drugs intended for pilot distribution. A faded instruction manual, partially translated, advised careful monitoring for signs of overdose and behavioral anomalies. Why were these supplies left behind? And what does their presence disclose about Japan's awareness of American pharmacological warfare? Were these forgotten relics evidence of desperation or a missed opportunity to counter the chemical advantage? As the decades passed, the story of psychotropic drugs in the Pacific Theater remained a shadowy footnote, overshadowed by grander narratives of battles and strategy. Yet, in the quiet corners of military hospitals, research institutes, and intelligence archives, traces persisted, fragments of a hidden war fought not only in skies but within the minds of those who dared to fly. The shock Japan experienced upon learning of these drugs was more than surprise. It was a profound awakening to a new kind of warfare, one that blurred the lines between soldier and subject, victory and sacrifice. What remains to be uncovered in the layers of classified files and personal memories, and how will these revelations reshape our understanding of courage, control, and the true cost of conflict? By the late 1960s, as Japan's self-defense forces modernized, a discrete shift occurred in training manuals and medical protocols, subtle acknowledgments of the psychological and chemical dimensions of combat readiness. A classified training film, recently declassified and discovered in a remote archive, shows instructors discussing cognitive enhancement and mental endurance with a tone previously absent from wartime doctrine. The film's grainy footage intersperses scenes of pilot drills with graphs of neurotransmitter activity, an unsettling fusion of human skill and biochemical manipulation. Behind this evolution lay the lingering impact of Japan's wartime shock, a recognition that future conflicts would demand mastery not only of machines and tactics, but of the mind's fragile chemistry. What ethical dilemmas did these emerging practices provoke? And to what extent had the specter of psychotropic warfare permanently altered Japan's military psyche? In the shadow of these developments, personal testimonies began to surface. Diaries, letters, and interviews from veterans who had glimpsed the chemical underbelly of aerial combat. One former pilot recalled the eerie calm before missions maintained by substances that numbed fear but frayed sanity. Another spoke of comrades lost not to bullets but to breakdowns triggered by the very drugs meant to save them. These voices, long silenced by stigma and secrecy, now paint a haunting portrait of a generation caught between valor and vulnerability. How did these men reconcile their service with the hidden costs borne in mind and body? And what responsibility do historians bear in unearthing these truths? The story of how Japan was shocked by the psychotropic drugs given to American pilots is thus more than a wartime anecdote. It is a window into the evolving nature of conflict itself. It reveals a battlefield where victory hinges on chemical advantage, where the human element is both weapon and casualty. As classified archives continue to yield fragments of this hidden history, they challenge us to reconsider the boundaries of warfare and the price paid by those who fight it. What remains buried beneath layers of secrecy may yet redefine our understanding of courage, control, and the very essence of combat.